In a remote village, perched on the edge of the ocean, where the winds carried the smell of salt, there lived a humble fisherman and his daughter. Their lives were simple, bound to the rhythm of the sea, where each day the father cast his nets into the deep blue waters, hoping for a fruitful catch. Yet, as the years passed, his hands grew weaker, and the sea, once generous, began to withhold its bounty. The villagers whispered among themselves, for it was said that the sea gods were displeased, though no one knew why. The fisherman's boat returned empty more often than not, and soon the family found themselves on the brink of despair. With little left to offer and nothing more to sell, they were on the verge of losing everything. The fisherman's daughter, however, was not one to sit idle. She was a young woman of great resolve, with eyes the color of the deep sea and a heart filled with a quiet determination. She had watched the ocean's changing moons all her life and learned to listen to the stories the waves carried. While others feared the unseen powers beneath the surface, she held a deep respect for them, sensing that the sea was alive, not just with creatures, but with ancient spirits and forgotten gods. It was said that the sea god ruled these waters, a being of immense power who could bless or curse as he pleased. Some claimed he was cruel, others thought him indifferent, but the daughter believed that the sea god was as mercurial as the tides, neither wholly good nor evil, but something far beyond human understanding. One evening, as her father lay feverish from exhaustion, the girl sat by the shore, watching the setting sun bleed into the horizon, its fading light mirrored in the restless waves. Her thoughts turned to the tales the elders had told her when she was a child, tales of the sea god's domain far beneath the ocean, where only the bravest ventured and even fewer returned. Desperation gnawed at her, for she loved her father dearly and could not bear to watch him wither away. She knew there was only one option left, one last hope that the villagers would call foolish. She would seek out the sea god himself and ask for his help. That night, as the moon rose full and bright, casting its silver glow upon the waters, she made her way to the edge of the ocean. The waves lapped gently at her feet, as if urging her forward, and with a deep breath, she called out to the god beneath the waves. She called with all her heart, her voice carried by the wind and water alike. The sea remained silent at first, the only response the steady murmur of the tides. But she did not leave. Hours passed, and still she stood, her eyes fixed on the horizon, her body cold, but her spirit unyielding. Then, just as the first light of dawn began to creep into the sky, the sea stirred. The water shifted, swirling unnaturally as though something vast and ancient was awakening. The waves, once gentle, grew larger, rising and falling with increasing intensity until, at last, a figure emerged from the depths. It was not a creature like any she had seen before, but neither was it human. The sea god took form in the mist and water, his shape elusive, constantly shifting, like the sea itself. His eyes, dark and deep, locked onto hers, and she felt as though the weight of the ocean pressed down on her, testing her resolve. Though she trembled, she did not look away. The sea god, it seemed, was amused by her courage, for few dared to summon him, and fewer still dared to meet his gaze. Without words, they understood one another. She sank deeper and deeper, the light of the surface fading until there was nothing but the blackness of the deep. Yet, even here, in the abyss, she felt the presence of the sea god guiding her, pulling her toward his kingdom beneath the waves. As her lungs burned and panic began to rise within her, she suddenly found that she could breathe, the water filling her lungs as easily as air. The transformation had begun. The underwater world was unlike anything she had ever imagined. It was a realm of impossible beauty and danger, where the creatures of myth roamed freely, and the very water itself seemed alive with magic. The sea god's palace lay at the heart of this world, a massive structure formed of coral and stone, glowing faintly in the deep. Here, time seemed to slow, and the line between dream and reality blurred. She entered the sea god's palace, not as a guest, but as a servant to an ancient power. Her new life had begun. The days blurred into one another beneath the waves, and the fisherman's daughter quickly learned the ways of the sea god's realm. Time, as it was known on land, seemed to lose its meaning here. The currents of the ocean dictated the flow of life, slow and unhurried at times, violent, and swift at others. Yet always, the presence of the sea god was felt, an omnipresent force guiding the rhythms of his underwater kingdom. Her new existence was one of solitude, and though she was surrounded by strange and wondrous creatures, she often felt the weight of loneliness pressing in on her. The beings of this realm were unlike any she had known before. Some resembled creatures from her own world, fish, dolphins, and whales. But they were different, larger, more vibrant, infused with the magic of the sea god himself. Others were pure myth, beasts spoken of in the stories of the elders, great serpents that coiled through the water like ribbons of shadow, beings with faces both beautiful and terrifying, whose eyes gleamed with the light of 1,000 lost souls. These creatures paid her little mind. She was but a mortal in their eternal kingdom, a fleeting presence in a world that existed beyond the boundaries of life and death. But the sea god watched her closely. She could feel his gaze upon her, though he rarely appeared. When he did, it was as if the ocean itself shifted to make room for his presence. His form was always changing, as fluid as the water that surrounded him. Sometimes a great beast with eyes like the deepest caverns of the sea, other times a vague silhouette, humanoid but vast, his features indistinct. He never spoke, yet she understood his will. Her days were filled with tasks she could scarcely comprehend, gathering rare shells from the ocean floor, tending to strange and delicate plants that bloomed in the deepest trenches, and sometimes simply sitting in silence, her presence alone enough to satisfy the enigmatic sea god. The work was neither harsh nor easy, but it kept her mind focused, allowing her to push away thoughts of her old life. But there were moments, in the quiet of the deep, when memories of her father would surface unbidden. She would think of him sitting by their small hearth, his hands worn from years of work, his smile lined with the kindness that had always made their home feel warm, even in the harshest of winters. She wondered if the sea god had kept his promise, if her father's health had returned, if the sea had begun to provide for him once again. These thoughts were both a comfort and a source of pain, for she knew she might never see him again. The sea god had not spoken of her release, nor had she asked. She had made her bargain, and now she belonged to the sea. As time passed, however, something within her began to change. The longer she stayed in the sea god's realm, the more she became attuned to its mysteries. She began to understand the silent language of the ocean, the way the currents spoke in whispers, the songs that echoed from the creatures of the deep. It was as if the sea itself was revealing its secrets to her, and slowly, she came to realize that she was not merely a servant here. She was becoming a part of the ocean's fabric, woven into its endless cycles. One day, while she was gathering strange, glowing plants from a coral garden, she sensed a shift in the water. It was subtle at first, just a slight change in the current, but she had learned to listen to the ocean's moods, and this one felt different, ominous, almost. The creatures around her stilled, their usual graceful movements suddenly halted, as though they too felt the change. The water grew colder, the light dimmer, and then, from the shadows, the sea god emerged. This time, his form was darker, more defined, and though his face remained indistinct, she could feel his eyes on her, watching her with an intensity that made her heart pound. He beckoned her silently, and she followed without hesitation, swimming deeper into the unknown. The further they went, the darker the ocean became, until all around them was blackness. Yet the sea god moved with ease, as though the darkness was his domain, and she followed, her trust in him the only thing guiding her. At last, they came to a place where the ocean floor dropped away into a great chasm. It was a wound in the earth, vast and terrifying, and she felt a primal fear rise within her. This was a place of ancient power, a place where even the sea god's presence felt subdued, as though he too was in awe of the forces that lay beneath. He gestured for her to look down into the abyss, and she did, though every instinct told her to turn away. At first, she saw nothing but darkness, an endless void that seemed to pull at her, beckoning her to fall. But then, as her eyes adjusted, she saw something moving far below, a glimmer of light, faint but steady, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. It was beautiful, but there was a danger in its beauty, a sense of something ancient and powerful stirring in its depths. The sea god did not explain, But she understood that this place was the source of his power, the heart of the ocean itself. It was a place where no mortal had ever ventured, and she had been brought here not as a visitor, but as a guardian of sorts. She would not leave this place until she had learned its secrets, until she had proven herself worthy of the sea god's trust. Her days in the chasm were unlike anything she had experienced before. The darkness was absolute, but in it, she began to see things she had never noticed before. The faint glow of bioluminescent creatures, the slow, graceful movements of the ancient beings that dwelled in the depths. She learned to move through the water with ease, her body becoming more attuned to the currents, her senses sharper than they had ever been. She no longer felt like an outsider in this world. She was becoming a part of it. The sea god watched her closely during this time, his presence always near, but never intrusive. He seemed to be waiting for something, though she did not know what. She could feel the weight of his expectations, but she did not ask what he wanted from her. She knew that, in time, she would find the answers on her own. And then, one day, the ocean spoke to her. It was not a voice, not in the way humans spoke, but a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the water, filling her with a sense of purpose. She knew, without being told, that her time in the sea god's realm was nearing its end. She had learned what she needed to learn, and now, she was ready to face whatever final challenge awaited her. The sea god appeared before her, his form shifting and dark, and for the first time, she sensed a sadness in him. He gestured toward the chasm, and she understood that she was to descend into its depths. This was the final test, the last step in her journey. Without hesitation, she swam toward the edge of the abyss and let herself fall. The descent into the chasm was unlike anything she had experienced before. As she plunged into the abyss, the darkness closed in around her, swallowing her whole. The cold bit at her skin, and the pressure of the deep crushed against her from all sides. But she pushed forward, trusting that this was where she was meant to go. Time lost its meaning here. There was no day or night, no markers of progress, only the endless descent into the unknown. The light she had seen from above grew closer, brighter, until it illuminated the depths of the abyss like a distant star. As she approached, she saw that it was not just a single point of light, but many, swirling together in a complex dance, forming patterns that seemed both ancient and alive. These lights pulsed with a rhythm that echoed through the water, and she could feel it resonating deep within her chest, as though the ocean itself was breathing through her. At the heart of the light was something vast and incomprehensible, a force that she could neither name nor fully understand. It was not a creature, not in the way the sea god or the other beings of the ocean were. Instead, it felt like the very essence of the sea, the primal power that gave life to everything beneath the waves. It was ancient, far older than any god or spirit, and its presence filled her with both awe and fear. This was the source of the sea god's power, the place from which all things in the ocean flowed. As she floated closer to the center of this swirling mass of light, she felt her body begin to change. The water around her seemed to thicken, pulling at her limbs, until it felt as though she was becoming part of the current itself. Her skin tingled, her vision blurred, and for a moment, she lost all sense of herself. She was no longer just a girl, no longer just the fisherman's daughter. She was something more, something new, an extension of the sea, bound to its endless cycles. She did not know how long she stayed in that place, wrapped in the light and the currents. But when she finally emerged from the abyss, she was different. The water no longer felt cold against her skin, and the pressure of the deep no longer weighed on her. She moved through the ocean with ease, her body perfectly attuned to its rhythms, her senses sharper than they had ever been. She could feel the pull of the tides in her veins, hear the whispers of the sea creatures as they moved through the water. The ocean had accepted her, and she had become one with it. When she returned to the sea god's palace, he was waiting for her. His form was more distinct now, more solid, though still ever-shifting. She could see the outline of a face, the glimmer of eyes that watched her with something like approval. He did not speak, but she understood what he meant. She had passed the final test. She had proven herself worthy of the ocean's secrets, and now, she belonged to its realm in a way that no mortal had before. But with that understanding came another realization. She had completed her journey, but the bargain she had made still held. She had agreed to serve the sea god, to remain in his realm for as long as he wished. And though she had gained great power, she was still bound by that promise. She was still his servant, tied to the ocean and its will. Days passed, and the fisherman's daughter found herself falling into the rhythms of the deep once more. But now, the weight of her servitude pressed heavier on her heart. She had become something more than human, but in doing so, she had lost a part of herself. The memories of her father, her village, and her life on land began to feel distant, like dreams she could barely remember. She had given up everything to save her father, and though the sea god had kept his promise, she wondered now if the price had been too high. The sea god, ever watchful, seemed to sense this shift in her. One day, as she wandered through the coral gardens, tending to the glowing plants she had come to know so well, he appeared before her. His presence was calm, but there was something different in his gaze, something she had not seen before, a quiet understanding. Without words, he conveyed his message to her. She had served him faithfully, and now, he would release her from her bargain. She had fulfilled her part of the agreement, and she was free to return to the surface if she wished. The choice was hers. She could remain in the ocean, where she had gained power and understanding, or she could return to the world above, to the life she had once known. The offer took her by surprise. She had not expected such an act of mercy from the sea god, and for a moment, she was unsure of what to do. The ocean had become her home in so many ways, and she was no longer the girl who had first called out to the sea that fateful night. But she also knew that her heart still longed for the world above, for the warmth of the sun and the sight of the land. Her father had always been in her thoughts, even when she had tried to push them away, and now, the thought of seeing him again filled her with a sense of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. After a long moment of silence, she made her choice. She would return to the surface. The sea god did not seem surprised by her decision. He simply nodded, his form dissolving into the water as he stepped back, and she knew that her time in his realm had come to an end. The ocean currents shifted around her, carrying her upward, lifting her through the dark waters toward the light above. As she rose, she felt the weight of the sea slowly leave her, the cold receding as the warmth of the sun's rays began to touch her skin once more. When she finally broke through the surface, gasping for air, she found herself near the shore, where she had first called to the sea god. The village was in the distance, its familiar outline framed against the morning sky, and she felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She had returned. Her father, as she soon learned, had been saved just as the sea god had promised. His strength had returned, and the sea had once again become bountiful, providing him with enough fish to keep their family secure. When he saw her approaching the village, his joy was overwhelming, and they embraced as though no time had passed at all. She did not tell him of the things she had seen beneath the waves, nor of the price she had paid to save him, for those were stories too strange and vast for the world above. But in her heart, she knew that the sea god had kept his promise in full. Life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be for someone who had once walked in the realm of gods. The fisherman's daughter no longer feared the ocean, for she understood its depths in a way few ever would. The sea was not cruel, nor was it kind. It was simply the sea, ancient and vast, filled with mysteries that would never be fully known. And though she had left the sea god's realm, she knew that part of her would always belong to the ocean, bound to its rhythms forever. As the years passed, the girl became a woman, and the stories of her time beneath the waves faded into the whispers of memory. But she never forgot the lessons she had learned there, the power of sacrifice, the strength that came from facing the unknown, and the delicate balance between human life and the forces of nature. She had made a bargain with the sea god and returned from his realm, not just as a daughter, but as someone who had glimpsed the heart of the world itself.